yes in the chat if that's
Yes.
okay. And yes, you can. Thank you so much. Lovely. Great. Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much again for coming along to this session. And so many more still to come on. I've enjoyed the conference so far. I hope you're having a good time. And our teacher time is so pressured and so busy, isn't it, today? So for this one, please choose however you want to participate in the webinar. I'd love it to be interactive and I'd love you to type away in the chat box when I ask you questions. But equally, if you just want to be quiet, just listen, just watch, then please feel free to do that. Your webinar, your choice. At the end, I'm going to give you a Padlet link, which will give you links to the handout, the references, all the bits and bobs we talk about along the way. So you can take notes if you want, but rest assured you'll have everything you need later. So again, your choice. So before we get started, I want to ask you a question straight away. And this is my question to you. How do you feel about teaching lower levels? So maybe in that chat box, could you pop in a number 1, a number 2, and number 3? So you might choose 1 if it's fantastic, you love it, party time. It might be number 3 if it makes you feel really sad, angry, confused, scared, all of that. I'm looking at the numbers coming in. Oh, there's a good mix. There's some 1s though. I love that. Great. Or you might be 2, somewhere in the middle. Yeah, it's a bit scary, a bit strange. It makes your world feel a bit upside down. So if you've chosen a 3, I've seen a few 3s. If you've chosen a 2, seen a few 2s. I'm hoping to move everyone up to that level 1 by the end of this session. And so you'll feel great about teaching lower levels. And if you've got lots of fantastic ideas, well, you can, I'm going to invite you to collaborate a little bit on a Padlet and share your ideas with everyone afterwards and also during this session, which brings me to the session. So let's look at what we'll cover. So we'll consider relevant linguistic theory. So a little bit of theory there, a little bit of research, then explore tips and techniques. So that's looking at the practical classroom application. Number 3, we'll look at some classroom materials. So there we're going to look at some materials that you might want to create for yourself. Because I think at this level, we often end up creating our own materials and needing to supplement our course books a bit more because maybe that published work doesn't work perfectly with the classes in front of us. And finally, as I've mentioned, an invitation to collaborate. So let's get going. We've got lots to get through. First up, considering relevant linguistic theory. So I'd love to just talk to you for the rest of the day and tomorrow and maybe the day after that and a whole week about all the linguistic theory that I think is relevant and brilliant for lower levels. But, you know, we've got a short time together today. So I'm just going to look at 5 theories that I think stand the test of time. They're always in my head, whether I'm teaching, whether I'm writing, they're always there. And I'm always struck how valid they are today. We're going to look just at the initial theory. We won't look at all the developments since then. But again, I'll give you those references so you can explore it at your leisure after. So first up, we've got to mention crashing, haven't we? So within this theory, there are 5 hypotheses within there. Acquisition learning. So that's that distinction between acquisition, the sort of subconscious natural acceptance of language, and learning, the deliberate conscious choice to learn a new language, to attend a language course. We've got 2, the natural order of grammar. So that's following a predictable order, a progression from easier to more difficult grammar. 3, monitoring of output. That's that lovely way that learners, that we sort of self-monitor before we speak, before we write, we monitor our output before it comes out. I've graded those 3 out because I want to really concentrate on number 4 and number 5 today. So 4 is the affective filter hypothesis. 5 is the compensable input, I+1. I love both of these. I think the affective filter is in pretty much every webinar or every session I do because it's that important. Without that, I think there's nothing. And in fact, Blanca was saying just before, we want to have this nice, safe space of learning. And that's what that hypothesis is all about. It's the emotional, the psychological variables of language learning. It's creating that safe, welcoming, positive environment in which your learners can flourish. So for this hypothesis, it says that when the affective filter is up, I always think of it like a brick wall being built up and it almost blocks the learner from learning. So no learning is going to happen. But if the affective filter is down, again, think of that brick wall coming down. There's no wall there. That means the learning can occur because the student's there participating in the lesson and open to learning. So this is why I absolutely love that hypothesis. And comprehensive input I++1 is something that I think we always need to remember, because we've got the input, the level, the current competence of your students, +1. So it's a little bit more. We want that stretch out. We can't stay just at their current level of competence, because then we're just practicing, we're not learning and progressing. So we need to go +1, that little bit higher, that little bit further. And this always really reminds me of a similar time theory. Again, an old one. These are the original theories. You can explore the developments after in that Padlet I'll give you. So the zone of proximal development, a very similar sort of sense of where your students are now, where it's impossible for them to go to, but where they can go. So here we've got that shown in this diagram. So that little green, what I can do. This is their current level of competence. So that's going to be quite low, isn't it, for a lower level, an A1 and A2 student. We've got that bigger grey, what I can't do, input that is going to be outside of their reach. It's not achievable. But then in the middle, we've got this lovely orange, what I can do with help. And that's the sweet spot. That's the zone of proximal development. That's where the learning occurs. Like that comprehensible input, it's +1, a little bit more than where your students are. And I love this one, and I wanted to mention this one because it says what I can do with help. And this is our job as teacher. Our job is to help our students. That might be through providing translation, maybe, in for L1, if you know it. It might be by creating great materials, which we'll look at later. It might be by peer work. Many different ways you can offer that help and assistance. And thinking about input and help, I have to include this theory as well. Cognitive load theory. So this is always worth remembering, because it can be tempting to go quite quickly through a course book or through our materials with lower levels, but we've got to remember how much we're putting on them. How much is the cognitive load? Because don't forget, our working memories are limited in what they can hold. They can hold that, they can process it, and then that moves into the long-term memory. But if that working memory, it's too strained, there's too much going on there, we're not going to move into the long-term memory. So it's really crucial at this level to think, how much am I giving my students to do? Is it possible? Is it achievable for this to be absorbed, to be learned, and to move into long-term memory? Always worth thinking about. So now we've done 3 theories already, super quick, in about 10 minutes. We've gone through Krashen, we've gone through Vygotsky, we've gone through Sweller. So let's have a really easy, gentle question for you. And I'm going to hope and guess and maybe try and hear you shouting out the answer there. Oh, and someone's written in. Thank you so much, Ashley, for writing in. So I'm hoping if you're saying it, maybe you might want to whisper it, because there's no one, too many people around. Maybe you want to shout it and say, hola. You might want to do that and make people look at you where you are. We're going to come back to whispering and shouting later. So hopefully, I see you've all typed in hola. That maybe you've all shouted it. So this brings me to our next hypothesis, the contrastive analysis hypothesis. Always find that very difficult to say, but I do love this one as well. It's another really, really old one, but it's really interesting. Again, many evidence and developments fought against this since, but let me explain why I like this one. So I've just asked you to give me the Spanish word for hello, and there it is underneath the positive sign there. And above, we've got the English word, hello. And you can see they're similar, right? They look similar. There's capitalization, there's the Roman alphabet, the punctuation is similar. And if you did what I asked, and if you kindly answered and spoke that word, they sound kind of the same, don't they, as well? And the phonemes are the same. And there's a lot of similarity, because English and Spanish are quite close as languages. And this hypothesis says that the closer that first language and that second language are, there will be a positive transfer. So that might mean that language learning, an English person learning Spanish or Spanish person learning English, it might be an easier language journey than, for example, a Korean speaker learning English or an English speaker learning Korean, because of the complete difference there. We don't share the same alphabet. We don't share the same sounds, it's all different. And as I say, evidence for and against this, but I always know when I have students who do not have a Roman alphabet for their first language, or maybe they have literacy issues as well, that's always going to be an extra level of challenge there for the lower levels. Okay, so we've got one theory left to look at in this one, and it's group dynamics cohesion. And no, this isn't linguistics. This is slightly outside. It's in organizational psychology, but it was delivered by Zoli Dornier, the late Zoli Dornier, in 2018 at IATEFL. A really interesting session, and boy, is this relevant for us as language learners. He identified, as you can see, 5 aspects, 5 characteristics that help develop a cohesive group. So 1, learning about each other, because this is key at the moment, isn't it? Thankfully, in the ELT world, we're getting much better at seeking to be more inclusive, to look at all the complexities and uniqueness of our individuals. So we want to learn about each other, each individual in your class. 2, proximity and interaction. So that's exactly what we're doing now. We're all here together, same place on Zoom, same time, and discussing this. Cooperation. So it's working towards a common goal, which is what every language lesson is about, right? 4, we've got intergroup competition. So think of all those times in class when you have teams and groups competing against each other, a little mini group within that bigger group. And finally, I love this one, joint hardship, because what's more challenging than learning a language as a beginner, particularly if you're an adult or you maybe as a teenager? Yeah, it's definitely challenging. So for me, I love this. These are 5 things to really remember and think about when we're teaching. So we've looked at all those 5 points of theory. They're more abstract, they're more theoretical. So let's get in the classroom and move on to exploring tips and techniques. And if you've been to one of my webinars before, hello. And if you haven't, hello again. I love to use an acronym to try and give a framework to the content. So from start to success for beginners. So let's use the word start, and we'll use each of those letters to pull out 5 tips and techniques for you. So I think it's time for a question for you all. We're starting with the first letter S. So what could the letter S stand for? What do you think? Any ideas? Sound. Well, that's interesting. It's not what I've chosen. Success. Yes, that might be a good one. Any other ideas? Smart. Stimulate. Sequence. Oh, I love that one, Shireen. That's really interesting. Stop. Stop. I love all of these words. I've gone with syllabus. And for this, I don't mean plan your whole syllabus for the whole of the academic year. Nothing like that. I just mean what's in your lesson plan. Thinking about your lesson plan before you even get in the classroom, and think about it really strictly with these 3 I's. Important. What language is actually important to your student? What do they need? It's great to talk about animals, for example, but if your students have just arrived, displaced perhaps from another country, they need more functional survival language right now. Interaction. How much interaction are you including in your lesson plan? Think about that zone of proximal development. Are there opportunities for you to help your students? So teacher to student interaction. Think about group dynamics. Are you providing enough pair work, enough group work activity altogether? And input. Well, we've just looked at cognitive load theory. We've looked at that working memory and that long-term memory, making sure the level of input is correct. And we also know the input's got to be I+1, a little bit more to get that zone of proximal development. So have a think about all of that before you get to your lesson plan. And then also thinking about your lesson plan, our next T, not 1 T, but 3 T's, teacher talk time. Yeah, so we've got to think about this, because generally our aim, right, is to reduce teacher talk time and increase student talk time. We want to give our students the time, the space, the opportunity to think, to contribute, to answer in English. So how can we reduce teacher talk time? So here are 9 ideas for doing that. So across the top there, you've got the writing, drawing ideas. So can you use board work more, or your chat box? Could you use emojis or emoticons to express feelings? Could you write a teacher script? This is something I used to do when I first started teaching, and I was aware I was talking too much, just giving out too much superfluous language to my students. So I would write my instructions for each stage of the lesson. It really helped my self-awareness of where I was going wrong and where I needed to say a lot less. Across the middle, we've got all the visual ways you can help your students. So it might be through a gesture to indicate a certain meaning. Maybe you use puppets, props, realia, or maybe you just use mime and gesture, some kind of TPR, total physical response. And then across the bottom in the black, and this is about materials. So answer the questions. 3 words, a very clear instruction. Could you use in your materials the shortest, clearest instruction possible? Also, there's this beautiful white space in the next square. So with your materials, is it crammed full of writing, or is there space for whiteness? Just to breathe and not feel too crowded on the page and not to overwhelm that cognitive burden of your students. And finally, 0, here's from Kenya. So could you provide an example in your material so your students see what they have to do? And I can't talk about teacher talking time without asking you this question. So in the chat box again, should teachers use the shared L1 with lower level students? There's no right or wrong answer here. Do you think A always, S sometimes, N never? What do you reckon? We've got some sometimes or never. I think there's a few. Is there any A? I don't think there's any A's. I think we've mainly got S's. And I'm an S too. I think when I first started teaching, I would never use it and I would think it was some sort of crime and I couldn't possibly do it. But actually, there is sometimes a value. If your knowledge of the L1 is good enough, why not? If it helps with confidence, for clarity, maybe to tidy up any administrative things or practicalities around the lesson. We don't want to make it the norm, though, because we don't want an over-reliance on a first language. We want to increase their exposure to the language they're learning. And we want to keep it representing the L2 environment our students will one day be in. So, time for another question. Thinking now, putting yourself back as a lower level learner, could I ask you to say, what was your experience as an L2 lower level learner? So maybe it was a 1 if it was bad, or it's all the way up to a 10 where it was amazing. So we've got a 5, a 10 from Miss Heidi. That's a wonderful result. But we've got 5s, we've got 8s. Is there anything lower? Oh, a 9 from Ron. There's lots of positives. This is good. If you want to, you could add in a word about why it was that number. So I'm guessing all those 8s, those 9s, those 10s, it was a really lovely, positive, safe, welcoming atmosphere, a bit like that affective filter. And I'm guessing if your numbers were lower, mine would probably be a 2 or a 3. I had an awful experience at school learning, and that was due to the atmosphere created. So that's going to bring me on to our next letter. We've had syllabus, we've had teacher talk time. So A for happiness. I know there's an H there, and I'm sorry, but we're friends. We'll get away with it, I hope. So this is all about the affective filter hypothesis. It's making sure that our students, when they score your lessons, will be saying 7, 8, 9, 10, that they really enjoyed the experience, that you made it safe for them, welcoming for them, positive. You did everything you could to promote that learning. And it's important not just because of those reasons we looked at about creating a cohesive group. It's not just about enabling the learning. It's because we also want students to try language, and that means they're going to make errors. The trouble, though, with errors, they're never really black and white. Not in my opinion, anyway. Because sometimes I think, you know what? These mistakes are where we make the learning. This is where we try, and in a really safe, welcoming atmosphere, we can adapt to that mistake. We can see what's wrong and we can correct it. So this is why we need that safe, welcoming atmosphere. We want students to try it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's on the way to being excellent, perfect, whatever word you want to choose. For me, I sort of welcome errors. Do you want to correct your beginners? My feeling is yes, you do. And you need to do it kindly, clearly, and as soon as it's practically possible, because you want them to start making that change and having that uptake and using correct or more correct language. And you might wonder why there's this beautiful rooster bird on this poster. And this is always a good reminder for me about why we do need to correct errors. This is a colleague of mine who was learning Turkish. For 2 years, she thought she was using the word for rooster. And in fact, she was mispronouncing a vowel sound and saying the word for prostitute. and nobody corrected her. So do correct your errors. Let's move on to our next letter quickly. Syllabus, teacher talk time, happiness, and repetition, 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 repetition. I can't say this enough. So we know that language is naturally spiral, it's iterative. Beginners are always revisiting, rebuilding that language. And repetition, we can see it really obviously in pronunciation. You remember I asked you to say hello in Spanish, and you could do it formally, everyone together, individually in class. You could shout it, you could hold your nose with it. And I saw a really lovely webinar a while back with Adrian Underhill saying, the king of pronunciation, and he was saying to allow time for students to hear that new word and repeat that new word internally, to almost let it reverberate in your mind's ear, which I really love. I think that's a super way of bringing in a new bit of lexis. So you can do the pronunciation like that. You can do repetition through your interaction. Think about having that same speaking task, but you're going to swap pairs, create new groups, do a class mingle. And what about your practice activities in your course books? Can you create another practice activity very similar to that, but maybe listening instead of speaking, reading instead of writing? What ways can you do that? We'll have a look in a minute, because that brings me to T for tasks. And another question for you. How many lexical items should you teach to lower levels in one lesson? What do you think? No right or wrong answers, just definitely depends on age, Asha. Yeah. 5, my man, 1, 5 to 6 words. Interesting. Depends on the lexical set. Oh, that's a very good answer. 5, 7. 5 to 10. Okay. Let me show you a lexical set. So thank you so much for those numbers. And I think totally depends. Depends on the age, as someone said, Asha, I think. Research does suggest that it's between, that we can learn in one session 6 to 8 or 8 to 10. And I think that's the figure that I always have in mind when I'm planning my lessons, when I'm writing, 6 to 10. But this, and this is of course an extract from a course book about, this is 12 items. And as someone said, I think it does depend on the lexical set, because food, there's no abstract concept there. It's quite easy to translate. It's a really nice, natural lexical set. So we could increase the number, go to 12 here. And this is okay as an exercise, but it is white, Northern Hemisphere, Western. It's not really representative of the students I teach and the food that they like. So if you have a course book that has this type of exercise, why not create your own bit of material for our food and drink? And all of these pictures are from unsplash.com, which is a royalty-free site. So you can go in there, have a look for some pictures that represent burgers. I had one student who loved burgers, had to include that. Lovely flatbreads. We've got a variety of curries. I had really healthy students, so salad there and salmon and veg for them. So you've still got 12 items, but you've just changed it to customizing it to your class and making it specific for them and for their needs and for their learning. And we need that buy-in and that motivation. So thinking still about food, here's another little task. So is this speaking, or is it reading? Is it listening? Is it writing? What would you categorize this one as? I think it's one of those tasks that you can use for repetition. So it's a mix, I think. So it's reading, isn't it? You could have students listen to that role play whilst they follow the words. That's something I really like to do. And then it helps to increase that grapheme phoneme connection for lower levels. And they get to passively hear that intonation and all those very tricky sounds in there. You could also make this into a straightforward role play. So the same dialogue cut in half. So one person is the server, one person is the customer, and they've got their blanks there. So it could become a writing. So students will write in what their partner says. Or you can make it even more challenging and just give them the first line and allow them to build and create whatever they want for the conversation. So it's got a lot more creativity to it. So you've got that repetition, but it's completely open, and you've got that personalization as well. So we're starting to look a little bit at classroom materials now, aren't we? So I wonder if we should move on to looking at creating classroom materials and simple materials. So going from that role play, we can now look at this super simple 2-line in dialogue. So this would be in an A1 class, for example. And it's really, for me, it's one of these sort of deceptively small exercises and tasks. You might find it, if it was on a coursebook page, right at the bottom, near the end of the lesson, something that you do in 2 minutes in class. But you know what? Actually, I think this is a lovely, lovely speaking task. Lots of opportunities for fluency, diving in for accuracy, for confidence, for repetition, for group cohesion. This is lovely for a new group, perfect for group cohesion, building relationships. And is it simple? Is the language easy? Doesn't look difficult, but actually it is. If we look down that grey column, there is a lot going on here, even in this tiny little exchange of just 2 lines of dialogue. So look at all the language that's going on. Think about that cognitive load that we spoke about earlier. Think about that I+1, pushing your students on to that next level of learning. So maybe your students can tick each and every one of those bullet points there. But now that I+1, to do it in a more spontaneous way. So maybe walk around the class and introduce from memory using the to be verb, WH questions, WH intonation, subject, verb, object, word order, possessive adjective, contractions, capitalization, punctuation, that grapheme phoneme connection, the different greetings, the language chunks, the sentence stress, the positive intonation, the turn taken. There's so many skills going on there. So never dismiss these little ones. Look at everything that you can get from it in your class, everything that you can go through. So let me introduce this book. This is an exercise, that speaking exercise is from one of these how to write lower level materials, because it doesn't have to be a huge course book about your writing. It doesn't have to be a huge worksheet. It can be a really tiny, small exercise. But there are 5 key principles behind them. I wanted to share these with you here so you've got a little idea of what you could do going forward in creating your own materials. In the book, I go through a bit more linguistic theory, lots of details about these principles and examples. And then we have 10 models of material and analysis and critique of them. So for these 5 key principles that underline all the materials here, you'd look at the audience and aims. So that's being really, really strict about your needs analysis, because even A1 to A2, you'll know there's a huge difference between that A1 student just starting and someone who's finished an A2 course, using it well, and then maybe knocking on the door, going up to B1. There's a huge gap and difference there. So finding out your audience and aims is really important. That specificity of that. What is their age? What is their exact level? What's their competence? What are they into? What's their profession? What do they need the language for? What do they already know? What do they struggle with? What's their L1? What are sounds that may be different from the L1 from? Get into all of the detail for that. And what are their overall aims? And remember, those aims and those goals, they're all going to keep shifting and changing as you progress, and your materials will reflect that change. Then think of number 2 about the content in a general way. So what is it you're going to teach? What's the language point? What's the topic? Who's going to choose the topic? You or the student? Course book? Are you going to use some authentic materials? Are you going to use visuals? You're going to use props? Will you use the L1? Maybe. Maybe you can use it in your materials, maybe not. Content and structure is your next point. So having decided on the topic, your visuals, your props, what you're going to do, how are you going to frame that? What lesson model will you use? Will you go for PPP, presentation, practice, production, sort of simple linear model? Maybe dogma, no materials at all, and you'll just do some thinking and preparing before you go in and see what the learners offer you. Maybe you'll go for TBL, a task-based learning. That's really lovely, a little project at all levels and very motivating, but set in real life. So what's going to be your lesson model? What task types are you going to use and why? And what about your rubrics? We mentioned earlier in Teacher Talk Bingo, we had that really short instruction, answer the questions. So how short and efficient can you get your instructions? Layout and presentation is key. So you'll see in these slides, hopefully I've tried to leave a little bit of white space, not to have too much text on the page. And I think very similar for lower levels. We don't want to overburden them cognitively again by putting lots and lots of information on the page, too much to just for their brain and their working memory to deal with. And always thinking about the font size, the font style. So if you're teaching younger learners, then maybe you're going to use a more fun Comic Sans script, loads of cartoons, and you're going to change it appropriately for the audience. And finally, reflection and revision. It's always worth when you've played with creating a new material for your beginners, thinking about, maybe I'll swap this with a friend, get them to teach it, see what they think. Maybe I'll look at it tomorrow and see if I spot any errors, if there's something I can tweak. Always good to have time to reflect and revise. And I wanted to show you 3 examples of things that you could use with your class or create for your class now. So if you're teaching those younger learners, you may be starting with something as lovely and simple as the English alphabet and just asking them to get used to handwriting and creating those strokes. So you'll see here that the exercise is completing the alphabet by connecting all those dots for the 5 vowels of the English alphabet. And that's something that can be done with coloured crayons, with a lot more excitement around it, should you wish. This is just the worksheet for you to sort of think about the input. And you'll see in number 2 and number 4, we've got some little emojis in there as well. So it's another use of visuals to help comprehension with lower levels. So you've got listen and the ear to help direct learners to, you're going to be using your ear and listening. And number 4, we've got that little head with the speaking, the voice. So we're donating speaking there and saying. And again, this looks really short and simple, a bit like the other exercises. There's a lot going on here, a lot of good language work. And also this could fill up a whole lesson, and then you could repeat it and revise it the next lesson. So if this is near the beginning, A1 or maybe even pre-A1, this is also A1, moving up towards A2. Super simple again, not many words at all. But if we look carefully at those words, we've got consonant clusters. Have a look at grandparents, NDP. Have a look at the beginning, GR. Have a look at colleagues, a double L sound. Parents at the top, NTS. And we've got tricky sounds, the ch in children, p for parents. Sounds that can be tricky for learners. So within those words, a lot of work going on. And if you wanted to repeat and reuse this and revise this in a more fun way, then you could have a Pelmanism game with picture on one card of the children, the word children on the other card, lots of other images and words as well, mixing them all together and have students turn them over and find the pairs and then practice saying the words correctly. Let's look at one more example, having moved up towards A2 now. So this is a much bigger piece of material, isn't it? We've got an input there of realia. So we've got a kind of advert for a service, and then we've got all the questions on the next page. So as you can see, you don't have to read all those questions, but we've got that gentle, we decided here the lesson model, and quite a gentle linear flow. But at the end, we've got a little task, number 7 at the bottom. So there's a sort of project path-based learning there. So again, this is based on an advert, a takeaway advert, comes through our doors or is pinned up on bus shelters. This is based on an authentic material, even though it isn't authentic itself. And then the language is extracted from that, going through identifying the type of text, the comprehension, whether that sentence is true or false, a little speaking opportunity to output that, some grammar then, looking at the language, and then there's the task, something that's carried on outside of class with your students. So here we are towards the end of the session, and I've only got one more question left for you. So far we've looked at the relevant linguistic theory. Let's look at those 5 pieces of theory. We've looked at exploring tips and techniques through the START acronym, so the syllabus, the teacher talk time, the happiness, the repetition, and the tasks. And we've looked at some classroom materials, things that look really simple and small, but actually have a lot going on, and some ways to develop your own materials should you wish. So my invitation now to you, if you would like, there's a big QR code there or the Padlet.com address at the top. So if you go to that Padlet, you'll find the information from this session, some more examples there. If you want to contribute your own ideas, that would be amazing. Please do so there. If you want to share and tag, then please do so. I would love to hear from you.